Be talking about the top 10 most important U.S. historic events. Now, I picked these events based on the effects they had on the nation and the world, possibly. I picked them based on that. So let's get into it. Number 10, Louisiana Purchase in 1803. Now, this is the land we gained from France, and I'll tell you why it had big effects. Number 1, U.S. expansion. Beforehand, remember, we couldn't expand west because of Britain. They didn't allow us to, because of all the Native Americans and tax and such. So let's get to 1A. This fun fact, 827,000 square miles were gained, so eventually hold 30% of our states. B, now this is a recurring theme we'll start to see throughout history. Americans begin to migrate west. Now, future APUSH students, this is key. We start to see this more and more. We're going to see this happen during the gold rush. We'll start to see when we get in a war with Mexico, we'll start to see Americans migrate west. This is all new land to them. They've never experienced it. So it's big. Number 2, U.S. begins to influence the Western Hemisphere. Now, this doesn't really take an effect until the late 1800s and early 1900s when President Teddy Roosevelt becomes president. But this is the beginning. This is where we start to see the U.S. takes control over the Western Hemisphere. A, France lost most of their land or gave it up. They gave it up to us, basically. This is most of their land, and they gave it up to us. I don't know why. They're going through a war back at home. That's world history. Let's focus on U.S. This is a recurring theme we're going to start to see. We're going to start to see Spain lose to Florida, independence of Mexico, and then France lost parts on the west coast, just as the Washington and Oregon area. I think that was France, or is that Britain? I may have made a mistake there. It may have been Britain. Anyways, it was one of those two. So my point is, we start to see all these European powers leave. They have no influence in the Western Hemisphere. Number 9, the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. This was a big event, in my opinion. I should have put this in the top 5 because of the effect it had on Reconstruction. So let's get into it. Number 1, new leaders with new philosophies. Now, President Andrew Johnson took in charge after Lincoln's death, and he had a different philosophy than Lincoln. He did not care for African Americans or former slaves, which we know is different from Lincoln. He fought for the 13th Amendment. Another thing that was big was Johnson can control the radical Republicans, as Lincoln could have. He could have controlled Reconstruction a little bit differently if he was in charge. Number 2, because of this, there's a shift in Reconstruction ideas. The radical Republicans took control of Reconstruction in the South, and their philosophies were completely different from Lincoln's. They viewed that they needed to punish the South, that the South needed to have a consequence for their actions. And Lincoln didn't believe that. He wanted to heal the nation. He thought that bringing the South back, that they should heal it and welcome them back. As we know, the radical Republicans didn't want that. And this is the irony of it, less enforcement in the South because of Lincoln's assassination. Southern governments create laws such as the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws that limit freedoms to African Americans and former slaves. This is kind of a form of slavery, basically. You're limiting their freedom. And there was no enforcement of the government because this guy and the radical Republicans didn't enforce it back then. I feel if Lincoln was in charge, it would have been enforced. And that's big. This is what we should know this, but this is what Jim Crow laws and Black Codes did. It led to segregation. Number 8, September 11, 2001. Now, most of us were born in this time, but we can't remember it because we're still in diapers. But we can always ask our parents, and most of them probably remember this day. I mean, it was a tragic day. Number 1, Americans were devastated all around the country. I mean, we'll see it in any town. Everyone was affected in some way because thousands of Americans lost their life. It was the worst attack on soil since the attack on Pearl Harbor. But I think that's a typo. What I should have said was that 9/11 was the worst attack on U.S. soil. I mean, more people died here than in the attack on Pearl Harbor. But anyways, number 2, increase in deployment of troops in the Middle East. Now, this would have happened eventually with 9/11 or not. There's a lot of problems going on in here, so we'll start to see the military get involved in here. California impact, not as big, but it's not a fun fact, but it's a fact. So yeah. This is big. Increase in immigration laws and deportation. Immigration laws and the deportation start to increase because of this event. So rules and such start to happen. President Bush creates Homeland Security by merging 22 governments. That's big. Now we're starting to see more control of this. They merged this to ICE. I don't want to explain that too long and too boring. B. After 2001, there's a steady increase in deportations. And in Obama's administration, we see it reach to 400,000 in a year. That's a record high. Now this is big. Thanks to this guy, the one in charge of 9/11, we go through airline security and a big surveillance. Full body scans, occasional pat downs, etc. Things to keep the airlines safe. Now it's a pain in the ass to go through the airs because this guy. Alright. B. U.S. intelligence increase. The government began to watch through phone and web surveillance. Now start seeing through social media eventually and such because of this event. Anyways, moving on. The invention of the light bulb. This was big for technology and such. We start to see the evolution of technology happen because of this. One, a revolution in businesses. With the light bulb, they could work longer after sunset. This leads to increase in production and longer work hours for workers. B, electrical industries were made because of this. New appliances. Now, with the household appliances, now with the light bulb around, they have electrical wiring go through the houses. So now we can start to see more electrical technology happen. These are some of the things that happen, such as the refrigerator, vacuum cleaner, toasters, etc. All these new household appliances merged after this because of the light bulb. Alright, let's move on to the next one. The attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, I personally, this was something I kind of like to talk about, but not. Let's move into it. Number one, now this is the biggest out of all of them. Americans switched ideology. They switched from being isolationists to interventionalists. Interventionist is just a fancy term for getting involved with the world. Beforehand, as we know, the Americans did not want to get involved in European and Asian affairs. They wanted to be out. They only wanted to focus on themselves. Well, with Japan attacking it, this guy over here, that's General Yamamoto, the one in charge of attacking Pearl Harbor, he pissed the Americans off enough to get involved in the war. What the heck happened? Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened there. Alright, U.S. enters World War II, what we were just talking about. Now, this is big in the world history, because with the U.S. entering, we'll see different things. But let's get into the U.S. history first. U.S. climbs out of the Great Depression. Now, that's big for us. We were going through a lot. Businesses began to boom in war production. B. U.S. develops Manhattan Project. Now, that's another top 10 event I have in here. But because of the Manhattan Project, the attack on Pearl Harbor, we see the Manhattan Project happen. A shift in power in World War II. Now, going back to the world history standpoint, shift in power. We're starting with the U.S. entering. We see Germany and Japan switch from offensive to defensive tactics. And eventually, we'd win the war. And the Allied powers would win the war because of us. The Great Depression, which we already mentioned, that was very big because of unemployment. We see 15 Americans, which is 25% of our population, were unemployed. They were workless. Most of them became homeless and such. A change in policies, the New Deal, that's the biggest. Anyone that hasn't taken APUSH yet, when you get to here, make sure you study all the policies that the New Deal brought. Okay, because I didn't do that, and it affected me on the AP test a little bit. So the new programs that are still in effect to this day, there are some that were gone, but new programs, they're still in it. Banks, this is the biggest out of all of them. A change in the banking system. Glass-Steagall Act, FDIC, programs to prevent another depression from forming. The Apollo 11 mission, that's the moon landing. U.S. back on top from the space race. They beat the Soviets to the moon. U.S. wins the space race. That's the biggest out of all of them. We're back on top. Technological advances, because of this, we start to see freeze-dried food, CAT scanner, cordless tools, scratch-resistant lenses because of the moon landing. Boost to American morale. Remember, Sputnik got launched beforehand. Soviets were winning the space race, so that was big. Manhattan Project, like we mentioned beforehand. Ends World War II by dropping it on Japan. We only used 2 bombs. That's big. U.S. becomes world power. That's the biggest out of all of them. U.S. had a power that all the world didn't at the time, remember. So that made us the world power. The Cold War. Soviet Union creates the nuclear bomb in 1949. They become a world power. Now you got 2 world powers. And that started the Cold War, in my opinion. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. This is where the Soviets put nuclear bombs in range of the U.S. And thanks to John F. Kennedy, we did not get on the brink of thermonuclear war, or World War III. The Civil War. Look at those guys. Look like they're really fighting it out. 13th Amendment passed. That's the abolishment to slavery. So anyone that doesn't know that, be prepared for AP government. Just saying. We saw that. Change in economy in the South. With the slavery abolished, Southerners have to rely on paid workers. And then segregation's the biggest. We talked about the Jim Crow laws and black codes. Because of this, we see that segregation still stayed the same, but we thought the Civil War would have ended it, but it didn't. And it took till the 1960s for it to be solved. KKK, not as big, but they rose to power because of this. And they still are in power, but not when I mean power, they're still around. They're not as powerful as they were back then. They influenced a lot of people. The Ku Klux Klan were against blacks. They were for segregation, and they went as far as killing people if you're in their way. Anyways, number 1, the Declaration of Independence. July 4th, 1776. We should know that date. Number 1, this is more of a world effect, but a new form in government. The U.S. formed the first successful democratic government. Yes, I mean democracy. Beforehand, it didn't really work out. We saw it in Athens and Rome, but it wasn't effective. And for the U.S. to form that first successful government, we start to see it happen worldwide and going away from the monarchy and the dictatorship. 2, split from England and Europe. No split, no independence, no ruthless monarchy. That's biggest. We got away from that. Expansion west, like we talked in the Louisiana Purchase. Without independence, the proclamation of 1763 would have been in effect. Led to the greatest president of all time, George Washington. There you go, Miss Morgan. Even though I think Thomas Jefferson was better. Just kidding, by the way. Anyways, this is the biggest out of all of them. No other U.S. historic event would have happened if we didn't gain independence. So all the events I talked about wouldn't have happened if we didn't gain independence. Big time. All right, that's the end of my show. I kind of rushed through it. I had some jokes presented in there about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, but as you can see, I'm over my time. So, yeah, hope it was helpful. I don't know why it'd be helpful anyway, but anyways, I'm out.